Aleister Crowley's Liber 81, the Butterfly Net, Chapter 6 of A Dinner with the Talk of Diverse Guests. Simon If and Cyril Gray had slipped out of the reception room to clothe themselves according to their dignity in the order. They returned in a few moments. The old man was in a robe of the same pattern as Sister Sybil's. Of all the robes of the order were thus fashioned, but it was of black silk, and on the breast was embroidered a golden eye within a radiant triangle. Cyril Gray was in a similar robe, but the eye was enclosed in a six-pointed star, and swords with undulating blades issued from each reentrant angle. Their return broke up the conversation, and Sister Sybil led the way with Lisa on her arm to the lobby. There, the wonder of the house began. The wall facing the front door was masked by a group of statuary of heroic size. It was of bronze and represented Mercury leading Hercules into Hades. So that would be what? Like diagonally in the Kabbalistic spheres, like from the left hand through the pelvis into the right shoulder, or in the background stood Charon in his boat, one hand upon his oar, the other stretched to receive his obelisk. Sister Sybil waited until all the guests were in the boat. Then she made pretense to place the coin in Charon's hand. In reality, she touched a spring. The wall parted. The boat moved slowly through. It took its place beside another wharf. They were in a vast hall, and Lisa realized that the hill behind the house must have been profoundly hollowed out. This hall was lofty, narrow, and long. In the midst, a circular table awaited the guests. Behind each chair stood one of the probationers of the order in a white robe, on whose breast was a scarlet pentagram. Neck, sleeves, and hem were trimmed with gold. Beyond this table, at which a number of other members in variously colored robes were already seated, though they rose to salute the newcomers briefly and in silence, was a triangular slab of black marble, the points truncated for convenience. Around this were 6 seats made of ebony inlaid with silver discs. Sister Sybil left the others to take her seat as president of the circular table. Simon If himself sat at the head of the triangle, placing Cyril Gray and the Mahathera Fong at the other corners. Lord Anthony Bowling was at his left, Lisa at his right. Morningside faced him from the base. When all were seated, Sister Sybil rose, struck a bell that stood at her hand, and said, "Do what thou wilt should be the whole of the law. O Master of the Temple, what is thy will?" Simon If rose in his place. "It is my will to eat and drink," said he. "Why shouldst thou eat and drink?" "To sustain my body in strength." "Why is it thy will that thy body may be sustained in strength?" "That it may aid me in the accomplishment of the great work." At this word, all rose and chanted solemnly in chorus, "So mote it be." "Love is the law, love under will," said Sister Sybil softly, and sat down. "Of course, it's a most absurd superstition," remarked Morningside to Simon If, "to think that food sustains the body. It is sleep that does that. Food merely renews the tissues. I agree entirely, said Cyril, before If could answer, and I am about to renew my tissues to the extent of a dozen of these excellent Cherbourg prawns to begin with. My dear man, said Lord Antony, prawns are much better at the end of a dinner, as you'd know if you had been to Armenia lately. Well, yeah, that doesn't have much of anything to do with it. Yeah, perhaps it's the Armenian custom, but when Morningside said something absurd, it merely meant that he was airing his fads when Lord Antony did so. It meant a story, and all his stories were good ones. Simon If jumped at the opening. He turned immediately and asked for the yarn. It's rather long, said Bowling, a little dubiously, but it's very, very beautiful. Unacknowledged quotations gave a curious fascination to his narrative style. People became interested through the psychological trick involved. They recognized, yet could not place, the remark, and they were stirred by the magic of association, just as one becomes interested in a stranger who reminds one of one can't quite think who. At the close of a dark afternoon, pursued Lord Antony, a huntsman of sinister appearance might have been seen approaching the hamlet of Sitkab in Armenia. This was myself, or I should hardly think it worthwhile to tell the story. Why detain you with a lesser potentate? I was in pursuit of the most savage, elusive, and dangerous wild beast. With the exception of woman, he smiled at Lisa so delightfully that she could only take it as a compliment. That infests this globe, need I say that I refer to the poltergeist? You must do more, laughed Lisa. You must tell me what my rival is. A poltergeist is a variety of spook, distinguished by its playful habit of throwing furniture about, and otherwise playing practical jokes of the clown and the pantomime order. The particular specimen whose hide, if they have hides, I was anxious to add to my collection of theosophical teacups, spirit cigarettes, and other articles of virtu, was an artist of singular refinement, for he performed upon only one instrument as a rule, but of that instrument he had acquired the most admirable mastery. It was a common broomstick. This genial spectre, or rather non-spectre, for the but rarely seen, only heard conditions precisely opposed, I beg you to note, to those that we require in little boys. This poltergeist, then, was alleged to be the guest of the local lawyer in the aforesaid hamlet. It had annoyed him considerably for some 2 years, while claiming through an excellent medium in the locality to be the spirit of a deceased adept. It had merely thrown broomsticks at him as he went about his daily task of making mischief between the citizens of that deplorably peaceful corner of the earth, are misappropriating funds entrusted to him for investment. He was an honest lawyer as lawyers go. I was calling to the bar myself in my unregenerate days, and he resented the interference, the more so as no writ of habeas broomstick seemed to abate the nuisance. The amiable creature, however, had recently taken pity upon his host, and sought to establish a claim upon his gratitude by saving him from death. For one day, as the lawyer was about to drive across the village bridge, he saw the broomstick fall from the sky and stand erect precisely in his path. His horse reared. A moment later, the bridge was swept away by the torrent. This is really excellent. Porch, Mr. F. Well, I had been called in to investigate this matter, and there I was, installed in the house of my brother Gond. The results of my stay of 6 weeks or so were inconclusive. I was convinced of the man's entire belief in his story, and the broomstick certainly moved in various ways for which I could not account, but I was not fortunate enough to observe anything of the kind when he was not somewhere in the offing, and one is bound to strain one's theories of the limits of fraud as far as is humanly possible, especially when one is dealing with a lawyer or a broomstick. So I returned from the parts of the tribes, even unto the modern Babylon. Well, there's a Babylon in New York, right? Where I abode for a season. A little while later, I received a card announcing my friend's marriage to the heiress of Sitkab, and a year later, again, in response to kind inquiries, he had the honor to announce that the manifestations of the poltergeist had totally ceased since time day of the wedding. Some of these adepts are, of course, fearfully particular on the sex question, as we all know. Fall for an hour from the austerities of a Galahad, and devil a cigar will precipitate itself into your soup. Nor will you be interrupted at billiards by the arrival of an urgent message from Tibet, written on notepaper of the kind you purchase in Walham Green, if you are a real lady, to the effect that the secret wisdom is beyond the veil, or some other remark evidential of supreme enlightenment in too much of a hurry to use the regular post. No, the story does not end here. In fact, the above has been but the prelude to a mightier theme. Once more a year passed by a singular and, in view of what happened later, I think an ominous train of circumstance. It occupied exactly 12 calendar months in the process. I now received another letter from the lawyer. Whether love's moon had waned or no, he did not say, but he announced the resumption of the phenomena with additions and improvements. One encouraging point was that in the previous series, nothing had ever happened outside his house, except in the case of the bridge incident. Now the broomstick was ubiquitous indeed, and followed him about like Mary's lamb. His wife, too, had developed the most surprising powers of mediumship, and was obtaining messages from her Geist, which seemed of unusual importance. A new world was open to our view. I've always fancied myself as a Columbus, and as I had recently made a considerable sum of money by a fortunate speculation in oil, I did not hesitate to go to the expense of a telegram. I've always fancied myself as a Caesar, and I endeavored to emulate his conciseness. Come stay winter was the expression employed. A week later, those simple and pious souls, escaping the perils of the journey to Constantinople, were safely cloistered, if I may use the term, in the Orient Express. They were extricated from Paris by a friend whom I had thoughtfully sent to meet them, and the following day my heart was gladdened by the realization of my dreams, the actual physical presence of my loved ones in my ancestral halls in Curzon Street, those which I rented 2 years ago from Barney Isaacs, or rather from his heirs, for the poor fellow was hanged, as you remember. Well, the conclusions of science appear to indicate that a poltergeist of the better classes takes a fortnight or more to accustom himself to a new domicile, from which circumstance learned men have written many treatises to suggest that it may be of the cat tribe, though others equally learned have contended with great plausibility that its touching attachment to this lawyer shows its nature to conform rather with that of the dog. To me, it has seemed possible that the light is not altogether withheld from either party to the discussion. I have, in fact, potentially put forward the theory that the poltergeist, for all its German name, is of an ambiguous nature, like the animals of Australia, and I have ventured to rely upon the analogy between the broomstick employed in this case and the throwing stick of the Aborigines of that continent. However, this may be, friend Poltergeist began to rehearse exactly 14 days after the arrival of the lawyer and his wife, and was so kind as to oblige with a full recital, scherzo in A flat, or more accurately, a house 3 days later. I never really valued the Severus Vaz, the Severus vase, which was offered on this occasion to the infernal gods. So a destructive potlatch, huh? Or, well, something knocked it off a table or something, right? The mediumistic powers of the lady began to develop at the same time. The spirit had devised an ingenious method of communication known to science as planchette. This instrument is probably familiar to you all, but it is an inconvenient way of writing, but otherwise exhibits no marked peculiarity. Now that we have accepted automatic writing as automatic, there is really no reason why mediums should pretend that a planchette is not under control. The planchette gave us much and valuable information as to the habits, mode of life, social, and other pleasures of various parties deceased, and added free of all charge advice, which followed out would undoubtedly tend to make me an even better man than I am. It is, however, with regret that I find myself obliged to confess that scientific truth is an even dearer object of my heart than moral beauty, and the moment I was wholly absorbed in the desire to verify the latest facts about the poltergeist, for these lent great weight to the theory that it was some kind of dog, under the inspiring intuition of its charming mistress. It had developed those qualities which we associate with the spaniel or the retriever. Even in Armenia, it had been wont, when weary of its solos upon the broomstick, to gladden and instruct humanity by putting small articles in places where they should not be. I would occasionally find my socks stuffed tightly into my trousers pockets, or my razor poised upon a mirror, when I realized that morning in the bowl of night had flung the stone that puts the stars to flight, and that the hunter of the east had caught the Sultan's turret in a noose of light. But in the second series of phenomena, the faithful and intelligent animal had done far more than this, bringing into the house various objects from afar. It was evidently appreciated in the beyond that a poltergeist reach should extend his grasp. One day in the wonderful month of May, with all its flowers blossom, the planchette produced an exceedingly mysterious message. So far as we could understand him, he would bring more evidence of his presence. Proof was one of the words used. I remember that very distinctly. And the message ended with a sudden transition: look out for game. There could hardly have been a more superfluous injunction so far as I was concerned. I must describe my dining room. It is very like any other room of the sort. I dare say the point is that there is a big table over which is suspended a cluster of electric lamps, a flat shade covering these from above. The top of the shade is just about on the level of the eyes, a fairly tall man standing. I can see clearly over it from the edge of the table without straining. Well, we went down to dinner, and the poltergeist was exceptionally active all throughout the meal. The medium was exceedingly distressed by this insistence on the mysterious injunction to look out for game. It was only at dessert that the problem was solved. The medium screamed out suddenly, "Oh, he's pinching my neck." And a second later, lightning in a clear sky, a large quail fell from the empyrean upon my humble mahogany. I only wished I could have had Rear Admiral Moore, Sir Oliver Lodge, Colonel Alcott, Sir Alfred Turner, Mr. A.P. Sennett, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, present on that sublime occasion. There could have been no dissentient voice to say that this was not evidential, save possibly what is negligible on my own. What is negligible, my own, a poor thing, but mine own. I wonder if you had ever reflected upon the halo of excitement and romance which must gild the lives of the members of the worshipful company of poulterers. They are the true sportsmen of our times. Theirs to beard the turkey in his den, theirs to grapple the Lord Pheasant, to close in deadly combat with the grouse, to wrest the plover's egg from its lonely nest upon the moors, to dare 1,000 deaths in their grim heroism, the fulfillment of their oaths to supply us with sparrow, cat, or rabbit. Think, too, of the relations with the mysterious bazaars of Baghdad, their traffickings with wily Orientals, the counting out of secret gold by moonlight in the shadow of the mosques. Think of Basin as he painfully deciphers the code of cablegram from Fort Noon, burns the message, and armed with a dagger in the bag of uncut rubies, plunges from the Gezira Palace Hotel to his rendezvous with Ahmed Abdullah in the fish market, where, with no eye to see, the hideous bargain is concluded, and handing over his rubies, Mason sallies from that dreadful alley, clutching beneath his gabardine a quail and secret gold by moonlight. And the shadow, so not at the masjid, sort of the, okay. Because I was going to say that secular talk and business is not allowed in a masjid. So how can you say that, paying the person to lead the sermon or to lead the prayer, especially, is something Islamic? That just doesn't make sense to claim. You have not thought of such thoughts, nor until now had I. But I knew that quails were cold storage products of the burning East, and I knew that the number of poulterers in my vicinity was limited. Early the next morning, I visited in turn these respectable tradesmen. Or the third of whom remembered the sale of quail to a lady on the previous day. Both quail and lady answered to the descriptions I had in mind. It had been the custom of my guests to walk abroad in the afternoons, now singly, now together, now with one or another of the members of my household. On this particular day, I begged the medium to permit me the honor of escorting her. She agreed with characteristic amiability, and once in the street, I pleaded with her, like a child, to tell me a story. I said that I was sure she had a nice story to tell me, but no, it appeared not. In the course of our ambulation, we came, surely led by some mysterious providence, to the very poulterer whom I had seen in the morning. I led her to that worthy man. Yes, my lord, he replied to my urbane question with affable obsequiescence. With affable obsequence, this is the lady to whom I sold the quail. She contradicted the statement brusquely. She had never been in the shop in her life. We proceeded on her walk. Tell me, I said, exactly what you did do when you were out yesterday. Nothing at all, she answered. I went and sat in the park for a little. Presently, my sister came and sat down with me, and we talked for a little. Then she went away, and came back in about half an hour. We talked some more, and then I came away back to Curzon Street. On our return, I questioned her husband. Sister, he exclaimed. She never had a sister. The mystery was cleared up. It was a case of double personality. There was, however, still one small point. How did that spirit quail get onto the table? It had fallen straight, or so it seemed to us, and the butler said that he could hardly believe that a quail could have been concealed on the lampshade. He would have noticed it, he thought, while laying the table. The experiments continued. Some time later, Brother Poltergeist permitted himself some allusions to fish and the best possible taste, and I took my precautions accordingly. Before dinner, I slipped downstairs and made a thorough search of the dining room. Alas, to what treacheries are the most virtuous of us liable to be subjected? That medium's saucy sister, second personality, had again betrayed her to a most unjustifiable suspicion. For 12 prawns of the best quality were distributed in most excellent symmetry about the lampshade. A hasty reference to the dictionary. In most excellent symmetry about the lampshade, a hasty reference to the dictionary, not yet published by the Society for Psychical Research, assured me that this sort of thing was a prepared phenomenon. Now, if you are going to prepare a phenomenon, you might as well prepare it properly. And I attend, you shall soon learn how, alike to decency and to aesthetics. Dinner was served. The poltergeist supplied the conversation. Never before had he been so light, so genial, so anxious to assure us of our future in Summerland. But ever and anon he touched the minor chord, spoke darkly of proof and of fish. I beg you all to bear witness that I have not degraded myself by the evident pun. The desert arrived, and now the poltergeist was imminent. The lawyer thought to touch him and hold him. He saw signs of him all over the room. He ran about after him like a boy with a butterfly net. But all of this, I took no heed. I was watching the lady's face. Professor Freud would perhaps explain my motive as infantile, psychosexual, presexuality, but no matter. I watched her face. The lawyer, like what's his name, pursuing Priam, was close on the heels of the poltergeist. Jam is used by Virgil in the sense of prolonging the suspense. And last, he made one grab in the empty air. He overbalanced, must have touched the lampshade, I suppose, for a shower of prawns fell upon us, like the gentle rain from heaven, blessing both him that gives and him that takes. And, oh, those spirit prawns were beautiful upon the tablecloth, for each had a bunch of blue ribbon to tie up its bonny red hair. I had not moved my eyes from that fair lady's face, and I am sorry to conclude this abstract and brief chronicle of the prawn by saying that I cannot swear that she betrayed any guilty knowledge. Lord Antony stopped with a jerk, and lifting his liquor glass, drained it suddenly. Sister Sybil rose and bowed to Simon If, but Cyril Gray's voice rose in a high-pitched drawl. Better a dinner of herbs where love is than a stalled prawn and discontentment therewith. That's is that a takeoff on one of the Proverbs, or is it a Psalm verse or Lamentations? It's something in the writings of the Bible, right? The Ketubim for it. The master frowned him down. Gentlemen, he said, it is custom of this house that its guests pay for their entertainment. Lord Antony Bowling has done so by his delightful story, Mr. Morningside by his brilliant theory upon the function of food, and the Mahathera Fong by his silence. I may say that I expected no less and no different from any one of you. We are overpaid, and the debt of gratitude is ours. Morningside was pleased. He thought the compliment sincere. Bowling understood something of the soul which had escaped him until that moment. Mahathera Fong remained in his superb indifference, Lisa addressed the master, I'm afraid I haven't paid, and I've had a perfectly wonderful dinner. Simon If replied with, wait, my dear young lady, you are not a guest, you are a candidate. Suddenly conscious of herself, she blanched and became rigid in her chair. Blunked. Okay, well, blanched, same as, come flush, right? Pale faced. Simon If bade farewell to the three guests. Cyril and Sister Sybil conducted them to the boat and bade them Godspeed. The other brethren of the order dispersed, one to one task, one to another. Presently Simon and Cyril, Sybil and Lisa were together alone. The old man led the way to a cell cunningly hidden in the wall. There they took seats. Lisa La Giuffria recognized that the critical moment of her life was come upon her. And chapter 7 is the oath of Lisa La Giuffria and of her vigil in the chapel of abominations. And there is some mixing of the characters of who's who in real life, but obviously you see certain things being represented through all this, right?